going on, guys? It's Cimo. So today I'm super excited to introduce you guys to one of the most incredible tools we now have access to as players to help us improve our game going into competitive level events, and that tool is YGOScope. Previously, when it comes to preparing for events, all we really have to go on is the results of the past events from the tournaments beforehand. So maybe we'd get like the top 32 breakdown, we'd get the full representation breakdown if we're lucky, but usually we just get the top cut and maybe we get some regional tops here and there, but that doesn't really give us a glimpse into the entire format. But YGOScope allows us to do that. So if you're someone who loves numbers, crunching probabilities, and really just getting into the meat of data, this is going to be the tool for you. But before we get into that, I want to give a huge shout out to my newest patrons as always. So big shout outs today to Miguel as well as Zachary. You guys are the reason that this channel is growing strong. If you guys want to help support me in the channel through Patreon, then check out the Patreon link in the description below. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. So what exactly is YGOScope? Well, YGOScope comprises all of the data from all of the ranked matches that take place in Dueling Book, basically taking every single card that gets played, revealed, milled, sent to the graveyard, banished. Essentially, if a card goes in play, it gets tracked by YGOScope. And what this does is it allows us to look on a macro level at the data of what cards are being played, how often they're being played, and if the card is essentially winning and what the win rate of that card is. We've never had anything like this before, and I think this is going to be an exceptional tool moving forward for a lot of players, both on the casual and the competitive side of things, because it allows you to not only get a glimpse of how the meta is shaping up, but think about like when a ban list comes out and really no one knows where the format's going because the format is so fluid. Since the results update every week on YGOScope, you're going to get to see in the first week of a new ban list what decks people are trying, what cards are doing well, and the frequency at which those decks and cards are being played, as well as their success. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get over here and just show you guys how YGOScope works as a whole, how you can filter through some of the data, and also give you some of my impressions of what we currently have available to us of the data at the current moment, just so you can kind of get a glimpse of how everything works. So when you go to the home page, this is what it looks like. You have a little note from the developer at the top, but when you scroll down, this is what you have to work with. So you can see here, this is the data from the top 200 cards of ranked TCG matches on Dueling Book from March 13th through 19th. Now, this is really cool because we get to see the frequency at which cards are being played the most. This is what it's set to by default. So, as we can see, the most played card was Pot of Desires, being played almost 6,800 times. And then you see stuff like Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring. So, these are cards that a lot of different decks have access to playing, but we're going to get into the data a little bit more in depth here in a moment. You've also got stuff like Terraforming, which is played in a wide variety of different decks as well. Ghost Ogre. You also have stuff like Duality, which might not be played at the highest tier, but it can be played by a lot of different decks, maybe in the tier 2 and below range, so that's going to be tracked here as well. So just because a card has a lot of representation doesn't necessarily mean that it's a successfully played card in terms of how well the card does as a whole, but you get to see the frequency at which people are playing these types of cards. And I think staples like Ash Blossom, Ghost Ogre, Desires, Terraforming, these are probably always going to be at the top, so that doesn't really give us a good glimpse of how the decks are performing at the top tiers of competitive play. Where it gets really interesting is when you go over to the win ratio. Now, by filtering through the win ratio, you can see that when these cards are played, how often the frequency are that these cards are winning in those matches. Now, you might see how Miss Starboy and Totally Awesome are the top two cards on this chart, boasting a win ratio of about 68 to 69% if you round up. So you're probably wondering why that is. Well, if you think about it, it actually makes a lot of sense, and Paleozoic players exactly know where I'm going with this. When you think about Paleozoic, when they go into a play that utilizes Miss Starboy, they're probably going to follow that up with either 1 or even 2 copies of Totally Awesome. Typically, when they make a board like that, you're not coming back, because not only do you have to deal with that board, they're either having enough damage to kill you, or you have to play through 2 Toads, and you have to play through whatever back row the Paleozoic player has in addition to that. So this is typically the win condition type board, and that's why it boasts such a high win percentage. So you can see here, Mr. Boy only has a play count of about 400, Totally Awesome has 600, which makes sense because you're making Toad more often than you're making Mr. Boy. Mr. Boy is pretty much like when you're going in for the kill, or setting up the board that your opponent's not going to be able to break. So it makes sense that these cards have a very high win rate, because in terms of Paleozoic, if they're going to set up that board, your opponent's probably not going to win. However, because it has a lower play count, it doesn't necessarily mean it's something that has a high representation. I mean, if you look down here, Masterpiece has a play count of over 2,000 times compared to Mr. Boy at 400 and Totally Awesome at 600. So you have to go up by a factor of 3 to 5 depending on what you're looking at, but Masterpiece also has a win rate of over 2, sitting at about 67% when you round up. So that's what you're going to be wanting to look for here, and that's obviously much more representative of the meta as a whole. Now going back up here, Supreme King Dragon Starving Venom is next, and this has a play count of about 468, but it also has a very high win rate as well. And this makes sense because this is a key component of the FTK. So typically, when this card hits the board, you're probably winning the game because you're conducting the FTK and killing your opponent that turn. So it makes sense that this is the 3rd highest win rate card, because it's a part of an FTK that's going to just flat out kill your opponent. There are some instances where you're not going to kill your opponent with Starving Venom, and you might just copy an Electromite, but typically you might make like a Hope Harbinger or be in a very advantageous position that's why this card has solidified itself in the top slot. I'm going to skip Mecha Knight Indigo Eclipse for a moment and talk about Odd Eye's Absolute Dragon and Odd Eye's Vortex Dragon. So again, this is very similarly to Totally Awesome and Mr. Boy. These two cards go hand in hand. When you make Absolute, you're obviously going for Vortex as a follow-up, and when you see that these cards have a 67-68% win rate, that's gigantic, because that means that if you achieve getting these cards on the board, mainly Vortex Dragon, that means that you have a 68% chance of just winning that game because that card got dropped on the board, because your opponent more than likely isn't going to be able to clear that board because Vortex Dragon is just doing what it does. And the data here shows, you can see that Vortex Dragon was played about 869, let's round up to 900 times, so that's still pretty good in terms of overall representation. Then as you keep going down the list, you got Zephyr Metaltron, which obviously is part of that combo, so that makes sense that it's up there as well. And then you get to some of the True Draco cards. Masterpiece, for instance. Now, Masterpiece has been played over 2,000 times, and that makes sense because Masterpiece is the card that essentially wins Draco its games, just because it's one of the most oppressive cards ever. So it makes sense that compared to something like Vortex Dragon, it's seen a lot more play because it's a main deck card, it's searchable, it's really easy to get out in a lot of instances, and it boasts a 67% win rate. And then you also see, if you go down, you got True King's Return, you have Majesty Maiden, Monarch's Erupt. You've got a lot of cards that play in hand with True Draco here, and this is where you get to start molding and seeing what decks are doing the best. So we have True Draco, we have Pendulum Magician, and then we also have, Paleozoic up there. Even though it doesn't have high representation, you're wanting to compare the high win rates to the highest amount of play counts, because when it comes to stuff like the play counts for Totally Awesome and Mr. Boy, they're a little bit of an exemption because they're not being played as much as the other cards, but it's something you also want to keep in mind as well. Then going back to Mech Knight Indigo Eclipse, this is a bit of an odd one, right? Because why would this card boast such a high win rate? Well, when your opponent summons a Blue Sky, they're typically going to be searching for Mech Knight Indigo Eclipse off of that search, and Mech Knight Indigo Eclipse is either going to help you get a ton of damage on board, or help you make a rank 8 play, which might just kill your opponent and not give them any sort of recovery. So compared to something like Blue Sky or Purple Nightfall, which has a much lower win rate, you can see Blue Sky is down here, as well as Purple Nightfall down here. They're still good cards, but Indigo Eclipse has the higher win rate because it's kind of the finisher of the deck, that when your opponent's going in for the kill, they're gonna be going into that Indigo Eclipse. So that's why you can see a card like that is up here as well. So that kind of gives you guys an idea of how this works. What I wanted to do was as well, I wanted to go all the way to the bottom and just show you guys what the worst cards were of last week. We see stuff like Mirror Force and Bottomless Trap Hole. These cards are probably down here because they're very easily disrupted and being able to be destroyed before your opponent, you know, goes on with their plays. So that's why these cards have a win rate of about 38 to 39%. And then funny enough, you just have all the Blue Eyes cards like Melody, Trade-In, Sage, Blue Eyes, White Stone of Ancients. You have just all the Blue Eyes cards sitting at the bottom here, and you can contribute that for a couple of reasons. You could either say that Blue Eyes isn't a good deck right now, the deck is just bad in general, or the people playing the deck aren't very good with it. So there's a little bit of room for interpretation, but I love that it shows us this for all of the top 200 cards that were played from the previous week. What's also cool is it also does data from current results. So this is from March 20th to the current moment. So this is updating as the week goes on, and there's still a lot of stuff going on here, but you can see Pot of Desires is only at a 2,000 count, so we have a long way to go, but it's really cool to see how these results are updating as the week goes on. You can also check the prior week. This is March 6th through March 12th, and this allows you to get another week's worth of data and kind of notice how the trends are evolving as time goes on. So guys, I really hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope you guys use this tool to help level up your game. I think this is an amazing tool for anyone looking to get better, and honestly, if you have any recommendations for stuff you'd like to see on this website, leave your feedback down in the comments below. The developer is taking any and all suggestions to give us all the tools we want, so if you have a really good idea, I'm pretty sure that they would love to hear it. So guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always, subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content, and if you found this video informative, consider backing me on Patreon, because just by pledging only $1 a month, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.